Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's 3 o'clock here in the Pacific Northwest. This is Jeff Morton, your host for Let's Talk About It. And of course, I moved the show to Sunday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon here in the Pacific Northwest because I talk to people from around the country. And I just was, it's kind of hard to get people on the East Coast to want to chime in and be live on the broadcast at 10 o'clock in the evening. So we're doing this on Sundays now, every Sunday. Every broadcast is going to be live on Facebook, YouTube, and also Rumble. And my wife, she's been after me each and every single show now. This is our 10th broadcast, I believe, to have you guys go ahead and subscribe to my Rumble page. You can subscribe to the YouTube page. But folks, really, honestly, I only use YouTube to broadcast this podcast. I don't use it for anything else. Rumble is the place where I want to go and where I want to post most of my stuff. So my wife had me, she said, could you please just put it on the ticker? So I'm going to put on the ticker here what my wife is wanting me to make sure I mention every single show. So listen, I've got a lot of stuff going on in my head, in my mind. I'm watching the events in the world. I'm not going to talk about this debate we had the other night. We're going to talk about something that's a little bit more really devastating, to be honest. And I'm going to bring on here shortly, in just a few minutes, my guest. His name is Michael Kimbal. And I've known Michael since he was, I don't know, maybe preteen. I go back with where I met him. I was about 17 years now, and he was there before I started attending. Of course, I'm talking about El Shaddai Ministries. So Michael is all of 24 years old now. He just turned 24 years old. No longer lives in Washington State. He moved to Texas. He lives just outside of Dallas. And so without further ado, let me bring in my guest, Michael Kimbal. Hey, Michael, thank you for joining me today. Appreciate it.
Hey, Jeff, no problem. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Now, listen, we go back. I started attending El Shaddai in 2007, and I drove up here for a couple of months, literally for 2 years before I eventually moved up here in 2009. How long were you there? Do you remember when you started going and how old you were?
Yeah, so I mean, my memory is a little bit sketchy around that time, but around 7 years old for me sounds about right. That would have been 2007. So 2007, 2009. But I was a little rambunctious kid back then, so wasn't doing as
Yes.
much talking.
Wow. I kind of watched you grow up.
Yeah,
You and
yeah.
a lot of your siblings. Of course, I know your mom, and but anyway, in my mind, you've always been very interesting. The older you got, the more passionate you became. That's the one thing that has always attracted to me. You were passionate about certain things, and you had very, very what I would say were, they were very mature for your age. Some of the things that you expressed. Eventually, you started getting involved with the political structure up here in Washington State before you moved out. Can you tell me a little bit about that before we get into tonight's discussion? What led you to start getting involved with the politics here in Washington State? And I think you were all about 18, 19, 20 years old.
Yeah, so I actually started around 2015, end of 2015, when they were passing that. I believe there was a piece of legislation they're passing to have same-sex bathrooms. So the person who was running the ballot initiative to fight those came to our Bible study group and talked to us about that. And so, of course, I was interested. Probably 15 was one of the years that I was the most highly opinionated. I was going to Federal Way Public High School, and so I was kind of surrounded by a whole lot of people and faculty who had views completely contrary to mine. And then this person who was running the ballot initiative came and introduced us to it, and I was like, man, I'd love to do something to help stop this craziness, because that was the craziness at the time. So we went out, different areas as far as like Spokane, Washington, to go gather signatures for this ballot initiative to stop same-sex bathrooms. And then a couple of years later, about 18, 19, was when I started getting involved in political campaigns up in Seattle. There were moderate candidates who were running for city council, and I was sort of looking at the options we had, which was the status quo of, leftist sort of corrupt politicians that, were collecting a lot of taxes for homelessness, and then turned out that they were dating the people where the money was getting sent to, or something like that. And also just, they had liberal agendas because they were the status quo in Seattle. And then we had the option of moderate candidates. So I was working on a couple of those campaigns around 2018, 2019 for city council. So that's pretty much, what I was doing. There was, involvement with the Republican Party of Washington State, but ultimately at the end of that, around 2019, 2020, I just became very disenchanted with the whole political establishment, because the people who had my values weren't the people who were being supported by the political establishment, either on the right or on the left. So,
well, yeah. I understand that very well. I too thought, I should get involved with politics here, the political structure. I believe that we have to have a voice in the political arena.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, we're just getting beat down. However, the more involved I got in the political arena, the more I realized, to be honest with you, it felt like I was in a bad church. People were arguing and fighting, and there just wasn't a whole lot of congruity. And they certainly weren't supporting the people I thought needed to be supported. And these would have been more along the grassroots type stuff to stop some of the stuff that is now legislated here. It's now law. The very thing you were fighting against is now law. And we're going to talk a little bit more about a lot of that when it comes to what's happening now in the school systems across the country. And one of the reasons why you and I are going to have this conversation. So I get it. I became disenfranchised with the whole concept of trying to put candidates in office up here that represented the people that weren't in the biggest counties. Is that a fair enough way to say that? Because the rest of the state, I found out that most of the state of Washington does not agree with the political structure here.
It's just that King, Thurston, and Pierce counties are the largest, or most densely populated, and most of the people there vote a pretty similar way. But then you've got the other half of Washington, which is spread out around the whole state, and they mostly would vehemently disagree.
Well, you eventually packed up and said, "Okay, I'm done." Tell me, why'd you leave Washington?
Yeah, so the reason at that point already in my life, I had sort of already become disenfranchised with the political games in Washington. I had been out of it for a couple of years, and I was doing truck driving. So in 2019, I had driven a friend's car down to Texas for him. His family needed the car down there because they had just moved there. And so I drove that down there, first long haul trip across the United States. And I rolled into Texas at 7 p.m. The sun was setting, and it was like 70 degrees. I was like, man, this is heaven. Then I started long haul trucking, and I was going to Texas a lot more frequently, 2021. And, I just decided I wanted to move down here. I always heard about Texas as a kid, and everyone has those ideas about Texas being sort of this conservative place, and so I just wanted to move down here because I figured it'd be a better place to raise a family, and that was the ultimate goal that I wanted, and I did not see that happening in Washington.
So now you've been in Texas a couple of years now?
Yeah, I've been in Texas 2 years. This August it'll be 2 years. So.
Now, folks, you got to understand, I met him when he was 7 years old. Now he's 24 years old. You just celebrated your 24th birthday.
Yes,
here,
sir.
June 10th, you said?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but I've always, there's something about a lot of the members of his family that I've always appreciated. There's a couple of families here that I really kind of gravitated towards as an older guy. And Michael's family happens to be one of those families. I kept an eye on some of the siblings. There's a lot of you. How many of there are you now?
There are 7 of us total. Yeah,
that's how much my mom had.
Yeah.
So anyway, I watched him grow up. I watched him leave the state. We partnered on a couple of things up here politically. I'm a conservative. Anyway, that's the bottom line. The bottom line is we're both biblical people. I see the Bible more from a political kingdom perspective as opposed to bench warmers in a religious service on a Sunday morning. I don't have that appeal anymore. I see the story of the Bible is something that people have fought with and given their lives over. And it's just kind of our turn. That's kind of how I see it. It's our turn. Are we going to stand for the things that are decent? Or are we going to stand for the chaos and all the crap that has literally dismantled cultures and societies over the millenniums? It literally is. Sexual depravity has been really a dying force in a lot of cultures and a lot of empires over the last 4,000 years. We're going to kind of jump into that discussion this afternoon. Michael, you're pretty passionate about this stuff. You mentioned the what is the bathrooms, he/she bathrooms? Well,
Yeah.
that's on every door now up here in King County.
Yeah.
There's no distinction between male and female up here. So
Yeah, and
you're
it's
pretty passionate about that. Well, go ahead, let's jump into it.
well, I mean, so I've always been raised, in a conservative household, and kind of the ideas of order are attractive to me, just because it brings stability. It's something that allows you to raise your family, and know have a sense of security. So when this stuff starts happening, when you get politicians that are pushing for men to be able to go into the same bathrooms as little girls go into, or women, because there is a big power dynamic difference between men and women. It's just upends everything that I've ever been taught as a child. How we're supposed to bring justice in the world and have order, and something that you can actually raise a family in. And that's really why I was passionate about it, even when I was 15, because you have these stories about a guy going in and molesting a little girl and saying, oh well, I identify as a trans woman, and it's that kind of stuff. It doesn't pass, and doesn't pass my litmus test of things that are right. And it's just so obviously wrong to me. But it seems like today our society is sort of educating the young population that that's okay, and we're slowly gravitating towards a place where that's okay. And so once chaos becomes okay, and it just sort of steamrolls its way into mainstream society, it just becomes worse and worse and worse and worse. And that's what I've seen, even from Texas the last 2 years, looking at what Washington legislature has been passing. I can see that just rolling into a bigger and bigger snowball of a problem. So
it's actually global.
mm-hmm.
The it's like the fabric of family has become whatever a person decides it to be. I remember reading a story about a guy who wanted to marry his computer because he got more sexual gratification from pornography on the computer than he did in a normal relationship. And he was literally suing to marry his computer. Mm. I mean, this is the kind of absurdity that we see. And of course, the incidents of women being molested and raped in restrooms and bathrooms and prisons is shot up through the roof. So I just think that there's right and there's wrong in any given society. And when you blur the lines, it's the consequences people don't think about. I remember when Portland said, okay, or Oregon said all drugs, they were no longer going to criminalize heavy drugs, heroin. Mm-hmm. Well, they've since rescinded that because they realize it's crazy. But the fact that they did it in the first place, and now the incident of people, they had these safe injection sites and whatnot. Yeah, they saw the population go crazy with addiction and fentanyl death. And I'm going, and so now they decided, well, that was a big mistake. Well, I'm waiting for that shoe to drop with this whole conversation that you and I are in as well. And I'm hoping it does. But you have countries around the world legislating this now. I think the latest one was Thailand, where you could now, there was the ideal of a man and a woman producing a family is, that's the old way.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, no,
anyway,
and it's all tied in together. I mean, it's the collapse of society isn't just about the sexual deviancy because like you said, the drugs, permitting the open use of drugs. There was a law in Washington not too long ago where the police could not pursue a suspect unless they witnessed them committing a violent crime. So if they witnessed them committing a nonviolent crime, they still couldn't pursue them. But if they witnessed them committing a violent crime, then and only then could they pursue them. So police were afraid to pursue people for crimes at that point. And I believe someone was telling me that has been sort of like half rescinded in the state of Washington, but they replaced it with something else, which still weakens the justice system. And that's something that I definitely haven't noticed here in Texas. You get pulled over for anything, but it's still an incredibly safe place. But like you said, it's a global thing. A lot of the European countries it's the norm, that they have same-sex bathrooms where they just, permit, gender affirming care, things like that. And there's such a thing as hate crimes, as far as saying you don't support this person having this
right.
identity because it's, perverse, it's wrong. They actually have that on the books, and that's really interesting because it sort of is something that Russia has used in their sort of political, I don't know what you would call it, political videos about what they're fighting is, in Ukraine, you have a lot of that kind of stuff that's from the Western influence, just, sexual perversion becoming the norm of the day. And then Russia will use that in their advertising, to get people to join the war, because they'll be like, hey, these people are perverting children at a young age and telling them they can, mutilate themselves. So why don't you join us and help fight that? And so that's how bad it has become, that it's, a global issue. And it's definitely not isolated. I just am more familiar with what I've seen here. So,
well, I mean, what do you think this is all going to lead to? I mean, what are your thoughts about? Because I agree with you. I agree this is what I agree with. When you stretch or erase the boundaries and invite chaos into a society, the society, when everybody wants what they think they have a right to have, then there's no congruity, there's no borders, there's no right or wrong, and no society can withstand that. They all
yeah,
collapse. What are your thoughts?
I think that there's one thing that's going to happen is it's the collapse of society, and that's either going to happen internally or externally. When you open all the borders so that millions of illegal immigrants can flood across the borders, and you don't have any regulation about who's getting into your country, creating a security risk, and then also this stuff about instability and chaos from just telling children they can mutilate themselves and not enforcing crime. All of it sort of just combines to where eventually there's going to be people who are tired of this happening to their homes and to their children, and they're going to fight back. And then you have an internal collapse of the society. Or once you don't have any sort of order in your society, a stronger society from outside takes it over, and that's what's happened throughout all of human history. So I think ultimately that's what's going to happen. Before that, we're just going to see more and more degradation of society. I forget where it was that I read this, and I'm not a super big stats guy, but it was something like my grandma's generation, it was like 2.5% of people identified as gay or lesbian or something like that, and then my mom's generation went to more like 10% or 5%, and then my generation was like 10 or 15%, and then the next generation's like 15 to 25%. So it just exponentially keeps growing. This sort of sexual deviancy is like a sort of a virus that spreads extremely rapidly. And I personally, it seems like that's exactly what's been happening, because when I was 15, what we were fighting against was to not let men go into little girls' bathrooms. And now I'm 24. I'm 9 years older than when I was, doing that. 8 years older even than when I was doing that sort of stuff. And now we're arguing whether or not children can get taken away from their parents because their parents don't want them to mutilate themselves.
Right.
And the education system, the indoctrination system in this country is helping to assist that further collapse of society. So, I mean, ultimately, that's what I think is going to happen, and how far out that is, I'm not sure.
Well, we're talking about 9 years later. I mean, it's moving like a grass fire across the country.
Yeah.
The identity thing, and I've read countless articles. I can't cite most of them, where people are talking about how this is targeting the destruction of our country. With the borders being gone, the southern border being gone, the amount of terrorist activity flooding through the country, the amount of drugs that China is supporting, and I happen to know quite a bit about this. China's flooding the United States with fentanyl. And meanwhile, you have in the school systems, I'm going to tell you a story that happened to me years ago. All of my kids were in grade school. This is 25 years ago. And they had a school-wide assembly. Well, they didn't tell any of us what they were doing. None of the parents knew what they were getting ready to do. And what they did was they invited a homosexual couple, both male, gay men and gay women, and an unmarried couple. And the assembly was all about alternative lifestyles other than the traditional marriage. That's what it was all about. And they did this I think it was from first grade to sixth grade. Well, I found out about it and I thought, well, what happened to math, English, social studies, and reading? Why are we doing this? This is 25 years ago, probably more than that. And I went over to the school and I had some words with the principal, and they were threatening to have me arrested because my words were not flattering. I was pissed off. Do you hear me? I was furious.
Yeah.
And we got a letter in the mail saying several Christian families have complained about a recent school-wide assembly that we've conducted, but they used the word Christian.
Yeah.
Well, at that point, I was a black dude from New York and had nothing to do with what I believe. Okay. Yeah. I was PO'd that they were teaching my kids things that I didn't necessarily approve of, nor did I have an opportunity to have a voice on. So I left the school, and this lady approached me. She was probably in her 60s. She had purple hair, short hair, and I just remember she had piercings all over her ears and everywhere. And I'm looking at her and I'm going, she's like 60 years old, perhaps. She said, "Are you a Christian?" She stopped me and asked me if I was a Christian. I said, "Well, what does that have to do with anything?" She said, "Well, because while you go to church on Sundays, we've been meeting for the last 25 years in your PTA, your Board of Educations, and the National Education Association for the education system." And she said, "We believe that if we can teach your children to be less bigoted than you are, by the time they become 17, 18, 19 years old, they'll be more accepting of our lifestyle." And I went, it kind of caught me off guard because she said, "We've been doing this for 25 years. And that's the first time I'd ever heard, the LGBT community.
Yeah.
So I went home and did some research, and I found out that 63% of the school boards across the country were LGBT influenced.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, my goodness, they've been at work. And now we see the fruit of their labor, because with the breakdown of the marriages and the divorce being as high as it is, that something has to fill the void.
Yeah.
And they did that. They filled the void. I could care less what people do in their personal lives, but when it's now forced upon me and my kids and my grandkids, and now my culture and my way of life, then it becomes problematic for me. So I get it.
Yeah,
I absolutely get it.
and I mean, and that was the argument, back then was, hey, just people can do what they want in their personal lives, and the unfortunate thing is that when it's a behavior that is is absolutely going to spread, like something like homosexuality, it's unfortunately not something that is just in your bedroom. I mean, it just seems to me like it's inevitable that something, sort of like a homosexual couple, they obviously can't produce life. They have to have some sort of a heterosexual union to join life, whether that's what's that, I forget what the procedure is called. In vitro fertilization. Yeah. They have to have that in order to produce life, and if they don't have that, the only way to sort of spread what they do and continue that legacy of homosexuality, as strange as it sounds, is to make more people homosexual or open to homosexuality, and then that becomes the norm, and that is why I believe that it's in the education system, is so that it can continue to spread. Otherwise, if you let them all be on their own and do what they want in their own bedroom, then eventually there would be no more homosexuals, or any sort of sexually deviant behavior. But then again, there's the argument that we are humans and we tend towards chaos and disorder. So,
Well, I mean, I because I study history and I
yeah.
study history, I can name societies, empires that have collapsed because of sexual depravity.
Mm-hmm.
Right before World War II started, Germany was full of sexual depravity with
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of activity going on. And I remember in the 70s when I was growing up, and I was pretty promiscuous. You know, I was,
Mm-hmm.
but it was starting. It was starting in my generation. I remember, it wasn't about the relationships that I was having with girls. It was about, can I get their clothes off?
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of the attitude.
Yeah.
Way back in the 70s. Now, relationships are based on what's between your legs. And
Yeah.
that I've seen that across the spectrum. People get to know each other sexually first before they get to know each other personally. That seems to be a dynamic in our culture that I watched that whole process born
Yeah.
in culture. So,
Yeah.
but now you're 24 years old. Why does this matter to you?
I think it really matters. There's a whole lot to get into here, but I wanted to go back really quickly to the marriage thing, and that is one thing that I did look into a little bit. And when they introduced no fault divorce in the 70s, I forget exactly what year they introduced it. I mean, you can just look at the rates of divorce, and they skyrocketed, just exponentially. And I was also watching a podcast from Jordan Peterson, and he was talking about statistics that show that the vast majority of divorces are initiated by women, and so there's that aspect, and I'm kind of familiar with how this plays out in the real world, especially in like the Northwest, in states like Washington. If a woman decides she wants to get divorced with her husband of 35 years or something like that, and then she gets half of his stuff, and there's a lot of hurt that goes into that. And then I know a lot of people around my age don't want to get married specifically because of that, so then they end up having unmarried relationships, and that's sort of, I think, what typically results in children not having fathers. So I think that's a big part of it. I think I'm getting a little bit off track, but that's what was the question again?
Well, I think
Yeah.
I think you're right, but we're
Yeah.
still talking about the breakdown of society.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a product of a broken family, and I
Yeah.
know that your family was divorced.
Mm-hmm.
My father left my mother because of his homosexuality.
Yeah.
So I was 3 years old, and there were five of us, and I grew up with watching six lives destroyed
Mm-hmm.
because of what my father's propensity for men, and it was a secret. It was not known to my mom.
Mm-hmm.
So when all of this happened, and it doesn't make me biased, I
Yeah.
lived through the destruction that it caused.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I literally.
Yeah.
So I swore that I would never not be my children's father.
Mm-hmm.
And I never have ever not been their dad. All of my kids respect me.
Mm-hmm.
I have relationships with every one of them. I've raised all of them,
Yeah.
including my wife's son. He's my stepson, but not to me. He's my kid.
Mm-hmm.
But I swore I would never, ever, ever put on them what we faced.
Yeah.
And I was always going to be present. So, you know, the bottom line was I'm a believer in being a dad. I'm a believer in being a father. And I believe in the sanctity of marriage, both biblically as well as the foundation of every single culture we have on the planet. There's not, you know, nobody had sex with a rock and produced a child. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So now you're the other question I wanted to ask you was, what do you think we can do about it? I mean, what do you think? Okay.
Well, I think this is going to be a big, it's going to be myself kicking myself in the pants, just because, I'm not doing enough of it. But I think a big thing that we need to do is what that lady 25 years ago was telling you they were doing for the last 20 years, is getting involved in the education system. And whether that means, taking an active look into our children's education, supporting the family structure, the traditional family structure, and also just getting people involved in the actual public school system that are going to promote more conservative values and more traditional values around family to sort of fight back against the woke mentality that's already been in the schooling system for at least 50 to 70 years. Those are the major things that we need to do. And I know that I need to get more involved with that here in Texas, because I know that educators in every state, no matter how conservative, are still very liberal people, or tend to be. So that's a big thing that we need to do. And we obviously need to encourage conservative values in society in general. That is something that I'm not as sure about how to do, other than starting with our own families at least. But that seems like it's something that you've done a pretty good job at.
Well, why conservative?
Conservative, just because the values I'm specifically talking about are ones that, have already held our society together thus far. And so I think we need to hold on to them. That being, monogamous relationships, heterosexual relationships. So those are the types of things that I think we need to conserve, as opposed to progressing to, the homosexual relationships that are causing a lot of problems in society that we've already been talking about. And so that's sort of why I refer to it as conservative. Is just we need to hold on to the past in those aspects.
Well, I mean, I'm 100,000% conservative in my viewpoints about everything, and for me, conservatism is about common sense.
Mm-hmm.
To me, you can't every single one of us and everybody listening to this conversation was produced because a man and a woman copulated and produced a child. It's just a common sense factor. Mm-hmm. Now, for me, it's not about disliking homosexual people. It's not about throwing those people under the bus. It's about, this is what brings down countries.
Yeah.
I mean, this is historically the case.
Yeah.
This kind of thing where you have no boundaries and everybody gets to do whatever they want. A society, to use the word I can't stand, is not sustainable when everybody gets to do what they want.
Yep.
And there's no rules. There's no borders.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that our southern border is being erased, I mean, that's the biggest eye opener we have to the fact that this country cannot survive
Yeah.
if it has no borders.
Yeah. And I'd also like to state, just I don't hate a person that's homosexual. I hate the act just like I hate murder and I hate thievery. I hate all these things because they bring chaos, they bring disunity between men. Um, these are not they're not good things, and they're temptations that come from our own desire to fulfill our own self gratification. So like you said, we need to stop being obsessed with ourselves. We need to be more obsessed with our fellow man, our country, and the world, really, to build people up instead of building up our own ego. And I think that's where a lot of the problems lie, is when we just pursue our own desires. So,
Well, the problem with that, and I mean, I agree with you. So, what I'm seeing though, that desire, the whole of that desire, foundationally and fundamentally, is based on sex.
Yeah.
I mean, to be trans is based on sex. To want to be a man dominating women's sports is based on sex.
Yeah.
It's not based on the identity of feeling like a woman. It's based on the sexual identity of stealing a woman's identity. I don't even know how to wrap my mind around that. I just don't know how to wrap my mind around that.
I mean, I think that's why it's been characterized as a disorder up until 5 minutes ago, because it's not a normal working thought process to whatever you're thinking when you're thinking that the body that you have is not the sex that you have, because the distinction between gender and sex is something that's been sort of machined into society and isn't a real thing. At least I don't believe it is. So,
well, I mean, here's the crux of the matter. We need to tolerate this lifestyle at the expense of our values. Okay. No, I'm never going to do that. You know, I'm never going to say it's okay for you to go out and murder and mutilate children, rape and disfigure kids, because that's the value you have, and I need to accept that.
Yeah.
That's never going to fly with me. Likewise, the fact that marriage is being disassembled, literally destroyed in this country. I remember the whole Black Lives people were all about destroying the family. It was on their website.
Yep.
And I happen to know that 2 of those women were lesbians, and they wanted more prominence in the LGBT community. Used to be called Black Lesbians Matter. That's what they originally were titled. Decided to change it to Black Lives Matter because now they could kind of use that same thing against society and say, okay, now you're discriminating against me because I'm this or because I'm that. It's brother, it's like we're watching the fabric of common sense ripped apart.
Yeah.
And I don't know how our society comes back from this, because like you say, unless we get in the political arena, get into the school boards, unless we realize that this is what's happening to our nation, we've already lost.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so go ahead.
And all I know is, whatever we feel about how hopeless it is, we still have to fight, because, when we look back at the biblical narrative, it probably seemed pretty hopeless to people like Nehemiah. Pretty hopeless that when they went into exile, they were going to ever go back and, see their kingdom restored in their lifetime. But we still have to fight to.
It's like the slave trade. Yeah. I mean, it's like slavery. No matter how entrenched slavery was within the African world, perpetrated primarily by the Islamic world, we still had to fight. We had to fight for freedom. Whether it's over there or whether it's over here, we still had to fight. You don't give up. I agree with you. Hey, Carol, can you go ahead and take that ticker down and go ahead and run the next one? Because I'm going to switch gears here for a minute and come back to our conversation. Michael, I want to run a video of Pastor Mark Biltz because I want to talk a little bit about something that has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
Sounds good.
And
Sounds
that
good.
has to
I
do.
love to hear from that guy.
Yeah, well, here goes the video. He's going to go ahead and run that now.
The Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Then the Messiah returns.
Michael, the reason why I wanted to play that, because you know Pastor Mark.
Yeah.
Well, I have a dear friend of mine. He's 81 years old. His name is Victor Sharp, and he called me one day last week, and he said, he's an Orthodox Jew, born and raised in Britain. He lives in Portland. He said, if the Messiah, or he said the Mashiach, his words, if the Mashiach doesn't show up with what's going on in the world today, I'll be surprised. And as I sit here and monitor the events in Israel, I don't think people realize that if Hezbollah and Israel go to war, it's my personal opinion, based on my biblical understanding, that every nation is going to somehow be affected by this. Do you have any thoughts on that before we get back to the conversation we were having?
I'm not sure. All I know is that, in the end, the nation of Israel is, watched over by God. And, you look at the history and you look at the biblical narrative that, and that's proved time and time again by, archaeological research on finding new things that, justify what's been said in the biblical account. I don't have any doubt that, they're the apple of God's eye, and they're going to be watched out for. And, all we can do from over here is, try and support them as much as possible and be prepared. So
what do you think of that Hezbollah? I mean, that's,
I think they are on the wrong team, and that is really
definitely
unfortunate. And I am hoping, every day that they would turn and, see what they're doing and realize it's wrong and repent of it, because that it's not a good place to be on the losing team, especially when you're talking about the losing team against God.
Well, I wanted to kind of move away from our conversation just for a minute, because this thing right here, what I'm watching based on my understanding of history, is explosive. I mean, this is going to be a big, big deal. Israel's already approved, according to the information I've received, they're going to go into southern Lebanon, and this war is going to happen. And so I agree with you. However, I will say this much. What is the cost? What will be the cost to the globe when this war and this thing happens in Israel? I'm laser focused on that. I wanted to kind of say that to my audience, whatever audience I have out here, is this to me is a big, big, big thing. Big thing. Because of what the consequences will be. And I think, like Hitler and like the Armenian genocide and Pol Pot and Cambodia, the amount of death that seems to follow these types of things is exponential. And my heart hurts. And then we have a culture here that could care less about all that because they just want to have sex.
Yep. We're distracted by, something that is supposed to be an important part of society and supposed to hold up society, but we've turned it into something that collapses society, which is terrible. It was designed literally to produce life, and it's instead taking life away, because you look at the ideation rates, which is a fancy word I just learned for when, someone's suicidal and kills themselves. You look at those rates in transgender people, and it's just staggering how this hasn't been declared, an emergency health issue, and the government's not working to prevent these people from being so disillusioned with their biological sex, but instead, the political parties of today seem to be bent on justifying their delusion and furthering them into depression and suicide. So this thing that God meant for good, people today are turning into something that is evil.
And we're not hearing the reports of the teenagers that are committing suicide, or the transgendered kids who've been disfigured. And I remember watching one young lady. She was mortified at what she had done, and she battled with suicide every day.
Yeah.
Because she, in her words, and I can't remember who it was, she said, they lied to me. They lied to me, and they made me think that this was good and that this was healthy and this was wholesome. And I think about all the mothers and fathers who have kids struggling with this, and it's not even part of the conversation. And yet kids are committing suicide across this nation, and particularly in Europe. And we're not hearing anything about any of it.
Yeah, well, it doesn't help the narrative that it is completely healthy and completely normal for your child to believe and be correct that they were born in the wrong body, and that's extremely unfortunate, and that's the type of media that we have today. So,
what do you think? The people who oppose your viewpoint. The people who oppose your viewpoint, what would you say to them as a final question? And we've got 12 minutes left in the show. I'm going to let you go ahead and run with it. I want to run a commercial about my wife's products, because I want to say something about it at some point. But what would you say to people who think you're nuts?
Yeah, well, I would just suggest that they look at the actual data of the suicide rates among children who have been fed into these lies that they're a different sex than they were born as, and the rates of sexually transmitted disease that are extremely prevalent and much more prevalent among homosexual couples than they are among straight couples. And also just think about the fact that if homosexual behavior cannot produce life, and is instead something that majorly causes division in families, collapse of society with what we've talked about before, is it actually a good thing to just say, okay, well, let them live their life and also teach it to our children in schools? Those are the things that I would try and point them towards.
Well, I've had this conversation. There's one lady who she actually is friends of my daughter. She was at the wedding. She was a conservative, and she was abhorrently against all of this. So it's kind of an interesting conversation that we had. She thought the mutilation of kids was monstrous, and she thought it was kind of interesting listening to her defend her lifestyle while at the same time abhorrent about it. And I think that's what causes the confusion in a lot of people's mind. She was very sharp, highly intelligent, and I had a lot of respect for what she was saying. But it was like her entire conversation was a contradiction to what we would call normal. So now, what do you do now? What are we going to do now? Where do you go with this?
Well, like I was saying before, I'd say big thing is to start getting involved in the education system and putting people, because there's just too many children in the public education system to ignore that. They are the voters that are going to be voting on things like same-sex bathrooms in the future, and laws and legislation about these sort of things, like making it illegal, for example, to mutilate children. So we need to go back into the education system, because if we are not educating our children, who's going to? It's going to be the people who support telling them they can mutilate themselves, and that's all right.
I think to a large degree, many, many years ago, when the families started breaking up, and women had to go to work and fathers had to work and divorce was a big thing, that we kind of handed the responsibility to educate our kids over to the teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's a particular community on this in our culture that took advantage of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've talked to many teachers and they say, I quit. I couldn't do it anymore because I was vilified. I was ostracized for having a viewpoint that was contradictory towards what I was facing, what they were facing in the school systems, and they just couldn't do it. They quit.
Yeah.
And, I don't know how to fight this battle, to be honest with you. My kids are grown. My grandkids are growing up in this. I don't know.
Well, one of the things is we need to make it easier for school choice. So we need to give parents an easier access to choosing where their kids go, because I'm sure most parents would not be okay with the kind of curriculum that's being taught to kids these days. That's something that they've done they're continuing to do a better job at in Texas more and more, and that should continue around the United States. And I know a lot of parents who are sort of just they've completely given up on sending their kids to public school at all, and they just homeschool their kids.
You'll be happy to know it's funny out here because they have a huge, they can't fund the school systems here.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're listening to the news stories, they say, well, there's a great big giant hole in the budget. And I'm going, why don't you just tell the truth? Parents have yanked their kids out of the school systems here in Washington State in droves, but you're not going to hear that on the media, in the news. I've been sitting here waiting for one news station here in the King County area to say, oh yeah, parents have removed their kids from the public school system by the thousands here in Washington State, but they won't make that known.
Yeah, the news is not the news anymore. So
no, it's not. It's I call it the fourth tier or whatever. It's like we're at war with the voice of our media here.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's at war with the status quo, at war with the enemies of chaos, or the forces of chaos. So,
well, now that's a pretty girlfriend you got down there, my friend.
Yes, folks, she is.
You got to understand, I've known him since he was a young kid, and he is now. When you sent me the pictures of Anna, I believe her name is Anna Paula.
Anna Paula, yeah.
Anna Paula. I was like, wow, really? She's so pretty. Good for you. She's so pretty. And
yes, sir.
It seems to me like the move to Texas has been a good one for you.
Oh, it has been. That's for sure.
Well, man, I just appreciate you. I'm so glad you came onto the show. I'll probably take a little bit of flack for this program, but folks, I'm a conservative. I'm a biblical person. If you can't produce life, if that was the case from the beginning, then none of us would be here to have this conversation.
Yep.
So I just believe that we have to have this discussion, and we also have to stand up for what we believe. And I believe that marriage is the sanctity of life, and raising a family based on one woman and one man. That's how we all got here. I just don't get it. It's not an issue for me to stretch my imagination to accommodate that. I can't do it.
Yeah.
I can't do it.
Well, it's better to have to take flack for something than that you believe in than receive love for something that you don't. And I've definitely had my fair share of the latter of those two in my life.
Yeah,
and
me too.
I'm fed up. I'm fed up with not being true to what I actually believe in, and so it's important that we say it.
That's why I do this show, man, because I put everything that I believe out there for everybody to ridicule, to whatever. For me, it's kind of like, this is who I am. If you want to come on to my show and talk about it, I don't mind entertaining the conversation with people who don't like my viewpoint. But my viewpoint is the sanctity of life, the sanctity of marriage. I believe in the U.S. Constitution. I believe in being politically engaged. I believe in being involved in the community. I think we have a responsibility to make sure we support our freedoms in the United States of America. And there's far too many Americans, in particular the last 2 generations, that don't agree with that. I don't know where this goes, but until I, like you, Michael, until I have no breath in me, I'm going to fight for what I believe in. Amen. I'll give you the last word.
Hey, I don't have any. You killed it. That's right on, man.
Well, I appreciate you coming on my show, man. Carol, I'm just realizing it didn't broadcast on Rumble again, so we're going to close out the show with before you go, I want to say one last thing before you go, but we're going to close out the show with my wife's business, and I want to say something about that. My wife is seeing an uptick in sales on her business, and people are loving her stuff. I'm trying to figure out a way to do a little bit more promotion of her stuff, but we got this kind of campy video that a friend of mine put together to just kind of highlight her stuff, but I'm really kind of blown away with some of her sales of late. So we're going to run that video, and then we'll come back on the other side. If you would play that, Carol. You know, with her products, the mail person comes to the front door, grabs the products, the packages, and they mail them. It's just, she's got this whole thing set up all by herself. I'm pretty proud of her. But I hope you will support her business and buy some of her products. And I'm just really, really impressed with her. I think she's amazing. So anyway, as a final word to the show, Michael, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
I do appreciate it, man. I really do appreciate it. And you and I are going to be out here battling this fight. You in Texas and me in Washington State.
Absolutely, sir.
God bless you, brother.
God bless you.
All right. That's it. We're done, folks. Thank you for tuning in. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.